Okay, I'll admit it. In my intro, I intentionally undersold what an absurd movie this is. You can't convince me that an audience in 1948 took 1 minute of it seriously. But now you have to admit, wading through this catalog of cliches was entirely worth it, just to see Zachary Scott roll into traffic and get pancaked by a passing Packard. I showed this movie once to a packed house, and the cheers at that moment were gleeful and deafening. Well, as somebody familiar with the fight game, let me just say, Whiplash contains some of the most egregiously bad boxing scenes ever. Dane Clark had supposedly boxed in his early years, but you can't tell it from this. It must have killed real boxers who worked on these pictures to enact such cartoonish imitations of the sweet science. The guy who played Carney, for example, was retired middleweight champ Freddie Steele, who after quitting the ring found lots of work in Hollywood playing parts just like this. Although this was one of the rare times he once again got to don trunks and gloves and duke it out. Sparring in Rex Durham's gym was another former middleweight champ, Seferino Garcia, an all-time great from the Philippines. And can we really blame the phoniness of the fight scenes on the technical advisor? He too was a former world champion, light welterweight Morris Shear, who boxed professionally under the name Mushy Callahan. Just like in Hollywood, Jews in the fight game often change their names to something more ethnically acceptable to avoid the bigotry of the times. In the same year he made this glorious car wreck, Dane Clark also starred in his best film, Frank Borzeghis' Moonrise, made on loan to Republic Pictures. I look forward to the day I can atone for Whiplash by showing that genuine masterpiece on Noir Alley. For Alexis Smith, Warner's never really did right by her. By the end of the decade, she jumped ship, tired of decorative girlfriend roles. Not even sure they didn't dub her singing voice in this film, which would have been an insult, but not uncommon. More than 20 years later, she'd strut her stuff on Broadway, winning a Tony Award for her singing and dancing star turn in Stephen Sondheim's Follies. And as goofy and cockeyed as this script is, writers have to start somewhere. This is where Harriet Frank Jr. began what would become an esteemed career. Her mother was a story editor at MGM, which is where Harriet caught on as part of the Writers in Training program in the 40s. That's where she met her future husband, Irving Ravitch. In the late 50s, they'd make a formidable team, providing screenplay adaptations for such classics as The Long Hot Summer, Home from the Hill, Dark at the Top of the Stairs, and HUD, which earned them their first Oscar nomination. They were great collaborators with director Martin Ritt, writing 7 films for him, including their second Oscar-nominated script for 1979's Norma Ray. Next week, we return to the Warner's sound stages for a much tonier production, one made for the studio's queen, Bette Davis. She stars with Claude Rains and Paul Henreid in, yes, another story about an arrogant and jealous man manipulating the lives of 2 lovers. Except the art in this one is classical music. Join me back here next time for Deception. Until then, see you in the shadows.